Before we actually launch into questions, and I don't want to take a lot of time with this, I'm constantly being asked questions about what's going on in the country, about COVID, about lockdowns, about all of those kinds of things. And I want you to know that I don't have any secret inside information, but I do my very best to examine what's available so that I can help people to understand what we're facing. And rather than try to answer these things sort of one piece at a time, let me just share with you some information that I think will be of help to you. I trust it will be. This approach to the virus obviously has devastating impact on many people. In Japan, in 1 month, there were as many suicides as there have been in COVID deaths through the entire almost year-long siege. We know about that. There are people who are missing their normal medical care, and consequently, they have serious medical complications. In some states, as many as a third of businesses, small businesses, have become closed and are unlikely to open. I read that as many as half of businesses owned by Black people will not be able to open. Devastating financial results. A fascinating statement that I read recently is that there's an expectation that there will be 300,000 to 500,000 fewer babies born next year. That's a remarkable statement made by the Wall Street Journal at the end of November. Births were down about 50,000 last year, and this year, compare that to 300,000 to 500,000 as people have such existential fear that they're less likely to want to bring children into the world. We all know the nursing home saga and the sadness of that. There's a new death cause on certificates, and it's failure to thrive. It's used with those who die in those kind of facilities, and because nobody can visit them, the care descends, and I won't even describe the horrors of how those people are living when they're cut off completely from family. We all know that the price being paid by children is immense. The Journal of American Medicine, probably the premier medical journal in this country, put out a study in November 12th. And the study shows the educational attainment effect in years of life lost with young children because they're not in school. 24 million children, the ages of 5 to 11, have been out of school. They have models that translate that into years. Your length of education and quality of education is a determiner of your length of life. And the Journal of American Medicine estimates that we've lost about 5.53 million years in the lives of 5 to 11-year-old children in the future. The single greatest indicator for high school graduation is fourth grade reading skill. And as that plummets, because only 60% of the kids who are supposed to be doing online learning are actually doing it, and only 1/3 of them do it every day, their ability to read sinks, and their ability to get out of high school sinks, and there are all kinds of effects of that show up in an increased mortality rate. The Journal of American Medical Association is saying we are sacrificing our young ostensibly to save adults who are not vulnerable. CDC survival rate, if you are up to 70, you have a 99.998 chance to survive. COVID. In California, in the courts, in our case, it was presented to the court that in California you have one chance in 19.1 million to die of COVID. You say, well, it's a serious thing if somebody catches it. It can be like any kind of flu or virus, and it can be very serious if there are, as we know, comorbidities, and that's an important thing to keep in mind. There are some people who should be protected, and we've always been careful to do that, and we should be doing that again. But even if you're over 70, you have a 95% chance to survive, and that's with 10 to 15% of that population in that age group with comorbidities. Some medical experts are calling for us to stop calling this a pandemic. Essentially, they're wanting us to call it a syndemic. Pan means all. By virtue of the statistics of the CDC, if 99.998 people survive, that is not all being affected by it, even if they do have some symptoms. But what it really is a syndemic in that it synthesizes with other factors of obesity and heart disease and overweight and things like that, and in that combination, it becomes much more potentially significant. The Washington Post came out with an article that said everyone wore masks during the 1918 flu pandemic. They were useless. 50 million at least died in that pandemic because there was really no way to resolve it medically. The latest that I've read is out of the 50 million, let's say 30 million died of pneumonia, which is sort of that syndemic notion. Masks became symbolic. People were told, wear it once and wash it and sterilize it, and once you put it on, don't ever touch it if you expect it to work. I received a report from UCLA, the internal report, that in the entire system, they have tested about 140,000 people for COVID, and out of that, in their whole system, there are 27 people in the hospital with some COVID complications. 27 out of testing maybe as close to 150,000. There's one other thing I would just mention to you. Johns Hopkins, one of the great medical schools in our country, did a study of COVID-19. They released the study on the 22nd of this month, of November rather. It's titled, Relatively No Effect in Deaths in the U.S. The question that keeps coming up is, are more people dying than die in other years? And that's what this study was intended to find out. The study declares that the number of deaths is not alarming. In fact, it has relatively no effect on the number of deaths in the United States. Retrieving data from the CDC website revealed that the deaths of older people stayed the same before and after COVID. Since it mainly affects older people, experts expected an increase in the percent of deaths in the older group. Data says that didn't happen. The percentage of deaths among all age groups remained relatively the same as time period from 2014 to 2020. So if COVID-19 has no significant effect on U.S. deaths in the total number, why does it appear so? And this report says deaths from 2014 to 2020 were examined. There was a sudden increase in COVID deaths in the year 2020. Analysis of deaths per cause in 2018 showed the pattern of seasonal increases in death for all causes during the flu season. The leading cause of death is heart disease. In 2020, during that same period, COVID-19 related deaths exceeded heart disease deaths. Unusual because heart disease prevails as the number one cause of death. Here's the interesting part. Looking closer at the numbers, it was clear that compared to 2018, the 2020 numbers showed no drastic increase across all causes. Rather, there was a dramatic decrease in deaths due to heart disease. And here's the key. The total decrease in deaths by all other causes almost exactly equals the increase in death by COVID-19. They just assigned a different cause. There is, and you can look these things up yourself, there is a declaration called the Great Barrington Declaration, signed by 10,000 medical doctors and epidemiologists and experts, public health scientists. And the Great Barrington Declaration has grave concerns about how COVID-19 is being dealt with. That document says lockdowns are producing devastating results on short and long-term public health. This is not the right approach, and they recommend, these 10,000 experts, that we allow those with minimal risk to live life normally and build up natural immunity. Now, those are just some things that I wanted to give you to maybe ease some of the fears that you might have. As I said long ago when we first got into this, that we are the people of the truth, and we will always do the very best we can to tell you the truth. You don't need to be a victim of lies and deception, but when you see the people who are your leaders sitting around a table hours and hours together, health officials with the governor, and no masks and no social distancing, having a party, you might wonder whether they actually believe what they're asking you to do. Now, I'm not saying this doesn't exist. It does. I'm not saying it can't be serious. It can be. It can be anything from the flu to very serious with those who have other prevailing illnesses. But to completely destroy businesses, schools, children, young people, education, churches, and everything else in our society, every normal course of life, is an overreaction. And that is not my conclusion. That is the conclusion of 10,000 experts, scientists. That's a fair number. And I'm saying this to you because I don't want to be accused of putting you in jeopardy. People have said about me that I am mocking COVID, and people on the internet say all kinds of things about me with regard to the fact that I'm going to be killing people because we're meeting as a church. We are not naive about the reality that everybody's going to die, right? Yeah, and there are lots of ways that can happen. But at the same time, we have believed from the very beginning that the truth is that this is not a disease that kills everyone, and the statistics are in. 99.998 people survive this. And we have simply tried to follow what has become apparent week in and week out, and it started pretty early when it became clear that this was being misrepresented. The question comes up in conversation, why are they doing this? I'm not sure that everybody has the same motive. It can be fear, it can be about power, it can be about control, it can largely be political, trying to completely tear down the existing systems that we're used to. Power has always been that which maddens people to do the most damage of anything that exists in human ambition. Power is a brutal master. why they seek power, why they want to overturn things. That's for every person's motive, perhaps nuanced a different way than the rest of them, but it comes down to power and control. Changing the world to fit them. This is a collective group, some known and some unknown. And they have done something that's never been done in human history. They have made this global. That in itself is very interesting because now we are a global world. And that is a setup that we've been waiting for through redemptive history since the Lord promised that there would come in the future an Antichrist who would have a global government. This is the first time in my lifetime that we literally have such power over people globally that we can shut them down so they can't function. Cancel culture can come to you. This suits the world of Antichrist. As you look at the book of Revelation, there's the mark of the beast, the number, and if you don't have that, you don't buy, you don't sell, you don't exist. Everything about you, they know, the people who have access to all your data. They know all of it. You can go out of existence virtually any moment somebody decides that. This is the kind of world that appears to be perfectly suited for the Antichrist to come, bring a certain amount of peace. The world falls at his feet. He is the instrument of Satan. And of course, all hell breaks loose. And in that time of the Great Tribulation, God's judgment comes, at the end of which Christ returns. I don't want to say the Lord is coming soon, but I will say this, he's coming sooner than he's ever been before. The Bible says in the end times there will be lawlessness. And there is lawlessness and an escalating lawlessness and an effort to create more lawlessness by taking restraints away. This is a world that could find itself in such absolute chaos that the right satanic leader who promises to fix everything could be given the title of King of the World. That Antichrist, aided by the false prophet, is what we see in the book of Revelation. Many years ago, I used to think there were signs of the return of Christ being imminent, and there always have been, and we always know he can come at any day or any hour. But it seems that this is the world that we never knew could exist. We have the kind of weaponry that could destroy a third of the population, a fourth of the population, as we see in the book of Revelation. We have the kind of technology that can literally erase people out of existence. So it's just up to us to be sure that we're looking at the signs of the times, for sure. But I think we have to be aware of the fact that we aren't being told the truth. And that's not surprising, is it? Satan is a liar, and he establishes his kingdom on lies. So be discerning, be thoughtful. The Lord has been very gracious to us here. We've been meeting together like this. And for months and months and months. And the health department was here a couple of weeks ago to say, there's no outbreak at Grace Church. How is that possible if what they say is so? We are a microcosm of the world. The Lord has even given us protection from the Supreme Court twice, one case in New York and now Thursday another case in California, that whatever this virus is, it does not overpower First Amendment rights. So we are meeting, but not in a foolish or irresponsible way, with as much knowledge and thoughtfulness as we can have. And so I want to encourage you that, spiritually speaking, this is the best place you could be. And physically, I don't think we're a threat. We've all been together now for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks. I think I had this before Shepherd's Conference. A couple of weeks before Shepherd's Conference, I didn't feel well at all, and took some normal things that the doctor would give me, and it was over in a few days. You say, well, that's way back in March, so you got it early. Well, you may think it started in January. That's what you read, but do you understand what recently happened? A study was done, serological study with the Red Cross. They went back to the blood bank to look at blood that was taken from people in 2019 from October to December, and in 2% of that blood, they found the antibodies from COVID. It's been around a long time, relatively speaking. And it'll run its course like every other bug does. The tests, I received a letter from a Stanford doctor who said up to 90% of the tests are invalid. I asked a football coach, what do you do to protect your team? He said, we swab their nose with bleach. I'm not recommending that. I'm just very grateful for your faithfulness. Very grateful for your trust and confidence in the Lord and in the church, and for the wisdom of our elders, and for bringing us into contact with people who understand the truth. We don't want anybody to be unprotected. We don't want anybody to be unsafe. But life is a terminal illness, and far better to depart and be with Christ. So that's the best that can happen to us. But the statistic is so overwhelming. 99.998% of people will have no lasting effect from this. How can we literally tear the world to shreds over that? Other forces are at work. We're just glad to be here proclaiming the truth, right? Worshiping the Lord. So thank you for your faithfulness.